As I've already gone through each passing title, the Project Gotham Racing franchise has always been a showcase for anything new to the Xbox. The first game came out the same day as the original Xbox, November 2001. A follow-up came out in 2003, which not only improved gameplay and graphically, but became one of the earliest showcases of Xbox Live. Then in 2005, Project Gotham Racing 3 was a launch title for the Xbox 360. It had nothing but the fastest cars in the world at the time, and like the predecessors, it's still fun to play today. And while the 7th generation was still in its infancy, already Bizarre Creations were full speed ahead on another follow-up. As announced on September 2006 by Peter Moore at a Microsoft press conference, rather sooner than people had anticipated. Project Gotham Racing 4 was released on October 2007, just a month after Activision announced they had acquired Bizarre Creations, which meant this PGR title was the last in the series, and the Forza Motorsport franchise took over putting Ferraris on their front cover. Now, I was going into this one expecting Project Gotham Racing 3.5. I played a little bit of this game every once in a while to fill in the gaps for reviews of other games. I noticed a few additional cities, cars, but that was about it. But no, this one is a big improvement from PGR 3. This one further embraces the Gotham TV style by implementing a career mode, a calendar of championships that you compete in to increase your ranking. But the way it's set up, at least the first few hours, you're stuck on one continent for a bit and the whole championship is stuck in one country. Then after a few championships you move to another continent, before eventually entering world championships the further you rise in the rankings, which unlocks the option to drive faster cars. So no specific medals to earn per event. That's what arcade mode is for, which I also recommend trying out. In fact, it's very similar to the season play Turn 10 would implement in Forza Motorsport 3. Fortunately, despite setting itself in cities in long chunks, it's not as repetitive as it sounds, especially because it has twice the city/circuit counts. On top of all the returning ones from the third game, the new ones include Shanghai, Macau, Quebec City, St. Petersburg, and the Michelin test track. And I have to admit, I was briefly convinced that it was a real test track. It reminds me a little bit of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and I don't understand how they were able to cram even more new events like Current Sprint Breakthrough and Superstar. The latter took an attempt to understand, and most of the new ones are just modified versions of already existing event types, but a lot of them are different enough to think about how you're driving, and inspired other racing franchises to implement similar event types. I should have reviewed this game earlier. It did other things I would have mentioned that came from this game. And the importance of Kudos is more profound. Unlike the third game where you earn an insane amount of credits no matter what the difficulty, when you reach the target, whether it's setting the highest score or fastest lap, you still have to complete all the laps to give yourself a chance at earning the maximum amount of Kudos. Doing all the traditional means including power slides, air, two wheels, fastest lap, overtaking. However, championship standings are based on how much Kudos you've accumulated, and is the currency to purchase the vehicles and random goodies like 3D glasses mode. Sure, if you're into that sort of thing. Yeah, I didn't buy much here. Like the cities and event types, there are more cars to drive with Motorbike's a new addition. Because I spent a lot of hours on Tourist Trophy, which came out around the same time, these models look quite familiar. Like the predecessor, you have a garage you can walk around freely and swap the cars around to your liking, which expands the further you increase your ranking. However, the way it works this time is that you have multiple garages that look like they're set in different locations around the world. Look at the amateur garage. Is this fitting of a pro racer? You also move very slowly, like someone placed this sign right at the front door somewhere. However, because there are a few class level cars already available that are fast enough for all these events, I spent less time walking around these garages. I probably entered all 4 of them only once, and I find that the only reason to do so is to play the next Geometry Wars. What I really wish this game had was an option to customize the look of the garage. Kind of like Saints Row 2, change the floor, the number of windows, the actual size of the building. Fortunately, you get that freedom with the vehicles and motorbike outfits, for which I apologize for figuring out really late into making this review, or otherwise the whole video would have a higher volume of crazy colors on vehicles. But yeah, there's plenty of nationalities and vinyl presets which can be colored individually, similar to Race Driver Grid. Not as diverse as something like Forza Motorsport, but way more simple to comprehend compared to Need for Speed at that time. However, it's out there on the track that matters more, and car control feels noticeably heavier, like it's a little extra sim-based, even more so than PGR3, but still controls just as well. Cars are also more detailed, they weave and bounce around, the Caterham R500 a good example of that. There's an interior view for every single car, not bad for 130 vehicles, and with the exterior view, rev gauge HUD matches the car's real-life counterpart, which is a neat touch. And also, like PGR3, stats make a noticeable difference. Like if a car has less grip, you'll more likely unintentionally slide them out, like this Mercedes-Benz CLK55 AMG. But because it's an arcade racer at heart, all of them are manageable enough. Like the rest of the series, understeer doesn't exist in the world of Gotham TV. You don't need a virtual racing line to get started because the controls are that simple, and is one of the main reasons this game is really good fun to play. The same can't be said for motorbikes, however. Like my first impression in the Midnight Club titles, motorbikes are trickier to control. Almost every corner feels like I'm gonna crash, it doesn't go around them as fluently, and because you're going up against cars at the same time, they can easily hit you and it's guaranteed you'll end up worse off. Basically, it isn't as easy to pick up and play compared to cars. Or maybe it's more to do with me trying to get the hang of it. Like if I grew up with this game the same way I did with something like Gran Turismo, for example, I can imagine motorbike control being second nature, and apart from a few invitational events, they're only optional. Although if you can master it, you can get a lot of Kudos points thanks to a taunt button if pressed at the right time, particularly useful for the time versus Kudos event. I like the reactions of the rider, certainly a lot more personality than Tourist Trophy, I guess, and this is one of the main reasons why bikes were added along with the visual customization options. It's more about the personality of the player than the cars on show, selecting whatever suits your interests according to the developers, so even though I'm not the biggest fan of them, I am impressed they were able to implement them along with everything else in just 2 years. However, since it's a seasonal play-based career mode, it isn't just filled with the fastest machines right off the bat. You start off slowly like the first 2 games. It's like the developers are saying you had your fun in PGR3, now you have to earn it in PGR4, which is just as well. I mean, I like that you had fast and exciting gameplay right off the bat in PGR3, but the only reason I bought different cars is because I didn't want footage of the same model the whole review. Like it was possible to beat the entire career mode with just the one car since class rankings remain based on the car you were driving. It depended on my self-motivation to fill my garage. Starting slow fits better with racing game career modes. And despite what Ben Ward might have said about 70% of players quitting Project Gotham Racing 2 because they didn't have access to a Ferrari Enzo or Koenigsegg, I don't mind driving the slower cars. The Ford Sierra Cosworth, Lancia Delta Integrale, I would absolutely love to drive these in real life. And even though you can buy cars with Kudos, you typically drive something different every championship, thanks in large part to the invitational events that appear every once in a while throughout the career mode. Slower cars are also an advantage based on the track designs. The roads are even more noticeably thin, particularly in Quebec City, which makes it harder to perform slides when required. And like the third game, the track HUD can still fool you into thinking you're on a straight, but it's actually chicane. But because you're starting off with slow cars, it's easier to anticipate them, and when you eventually return to the continent with all the Hotshot and Master Championships unlocked, you'll have plenty of track memorization under your belt. Now for the returning cities, the main layouts that are drivable are exactly the same as the third game. The Strip in Las Vegas, the Brooklyn Bridge in New York surrounded by multiple grandstands and advertising billboards. Fortunately, they didn't just leave it at that. The cities look much more detailed, like you can see that brightness isn't an issue this time. It must have been a criticism of the third game even back in 2005 and they fixed it here. Corner apexes are bulkier and they're placed in a way that it visually represents the best line to be on as you enter the corner regardless of time of day. Particularly comforting given how many jumps there are in St. Petersburg. The second I entered my first race, I could tell the graphics have improved massively. But what stood out to me the most is the weather system, where each minute of the day feels unique. Like the snow in Quebec City, it becomes heavier towards the end of the event. If it's raining, there's wet patches randomized on the track which make controls suddenly inconsistent, and changes are accurate to the city you're driving on. Basically, like the first PGR, the weather is another obstacle in itself, therefore the game's difficulty affects more than just opponent AI. And that's not even the end of it. Going back to the vehicle stats and how they properly affect the driving mechanics, now look at this championship branch. There are plenty of different types designated in a way that no matter what vehicle you choose, you're gonna have a rough time on at least one of these races, and you can't select a different car between events. And as you increase your ranking, not only do cars become faster, but opponent AI push a little bit harder too. I always seem to go for the car that has the slower top speed. I might be thinking about it too much, but the car you choose really does matter for certain championships. If you combine the weather system, the rise to driving faster cars, and the increase in AI difficulty, it has a very clever and well-balanced difficulty curve, where no matter what you select at the beginning, you're gonna have moments that'll challenge you, and that's how it should be. This whole review, I only really nitpicked this game. Like, it could have been in 60 frames per second by this point. I mean, they did it with the first game in 2001. There's not much to do in the garage, and the motorbike controls leave a lot to be desired. But nonetheless, there's a lot more cars, motorbikes, cities, event types, improved graphics, draw distance difficulty curve. Cars control just as well, it's just as easy to pick up and play. It fixes a lot of what annoyed me about Project Gotham Racing 3. I mean, I still recommend it. You have to remember that it was a launch title back in the day, and here the developers had a better idea of what they can do with the Xbox 360, but Project Gotham Racing 4 is simply better in every way. The perfect arcade racer that becomes more enjoyable the more I played it, and had the developers not get bought out by Activision a month earlier, there's no doubt the series would have continued into the Xbox One's life cycle, because it's not like it was a commercial flop or anything, but instead they completely severed all ties to the franchise in 2008, and a few years later on February 18, they would shut down altogether after the failure of a new racing IP called Blur, which deserves its own review in the future because of how good that one is. And I'm not exactly holding my breath for another PGR follow-up, with the most recent news being Phil Spencer saying in 2014 that no Project Gotham Racing title was being made for the Xbox One. It's almost like it left as quickly as it arrived. 5 games on 3 consoles in just 7 years if you count Metropolis Street Racer. All successful on their respective consoles, yet it felt like it never happened, despite its influence on racing games that can still be felt today. But at least it ended on a positive note and sort of lives on under the Forza name thanks to the Horizon series, which is also just as fun, and is made by Playground Games, where some of the developers came from Bizarre Creations. But going back to Project Gotham Racing 4 specifically, it's superb, highly focused, taking everything that made the rest of the series so good, all the while being dirt cheap. So if you have an Xbox 360, I recommend it instantly. One of the best to come out exclusively on the 360.